Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Just give us one more minute and we'll get started. Okay, Sandesh, can we get started? Great. I think it's 4:04. We can get started. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the Avishkar webinar series for educators and teachers, where every month we try and tackle a topic impacting K through 12 education and how we as educators, school administrators, and teachers need to think about our changing world and how we as educators and how our education system needs to change along with it. My name is Pooja Goyal. I am the co-founder and COO at Avishkar, which is a robotics and coding education company. And I am completely convinced that our education system is undergoing disruption and needs to undergo phenomenal change in order to keep pace with our changing times and changing world. I'm so thrilled and honored today to welcome Dr. Pant back to the webinar. A few weeks ago, we had a panel discussion here in the same forum with a number of educators where Dr. Pant was a guest, and many of you wrote back to us saying you wanted to have a longer session with Dr. Pant. So he kindly agreed to come back. I'm very excited and looking forward to the conversation today. Just to introduce, while he needs no introduction, a very brief introduction about him. He wears many, many different hats. He is a physics professor who's taught at IIT Kanpur. He is an academician. He was the ex-pro vice chancellor at IGNOU. But more importantly, he's a technology futurist. He sees some of these technology waves that will impact society and the way we live way before others, and then thinks about what it means for our education system. And I've seen him do some phenomenal work in bringing the importance of these issues to the fore in education system over the last decade. So a very warm welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you.
So Dr. Pant, we will keep it a free-flowing conversation. The idea is to hear from you as much as we can during this 1 hour. I have a few questions that I would like to ask, and then we will also I will also ask the questions that some of the audience members in the audience are keen to talk about. So I'll start with this idea, Dr. Pant, that technology always has been a lever for massive change and societal shifts. We saw that in prehistoric times, in the time when we made the transition from being a hunter-gatherer to becoming an agricultural society/economy, when we transitioned from becoming an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, and then from an industrial one to a technology-led one. But somehow the pace of change in the last few decades just seem very, very high and very magnified, and something seems very different about it than the previous technology shifts that have happened. So my question is, do Do you think that is the case? And if that is the case, then why is it that it is so different?
Well, in some sense, what you're saying is referred to as the second half of the chessboard. There's the famous story about the person who discovered the game of chess and went to the king, showed the game. The king liked the game so much. He says, "What can I give you as a reward?" He says, "No, something very simple. On the first square, give me 1 grain of rice. On the second square, give me 2 grains of rice. In the third square, 4 grains of rice, and just double it from the previous square." And the king thought, what is this man asking for? And obviously, as you know, the first 16, 20 squares were very simple. After that, it started this thing. And this is where it is called the second half. So when you get to 2 to the power 32 and more, then the doubling becomes very serious. Now, what happened is, as we've been evolving, there is change. You said there is always change. The question is, what is the rate of change? So we are used to a steady rate of change where you might say dy by dx is equal to 0 and things don't change over long periods of time. This happens when x is relatively small, even though the function may be sine x or tan x or any other thing, or e to the power x, which is what we are now witnessing. So the problem is that when things are changing slowly, or you are at the initial stage of an even exponential function, changes are very slow. I often used to say in my talks, I don't know whether I said it last time. No, I couldn't have said last time, there was not enough time. So I say this, that when I was doing my MSc Physics in 1965-66, I could use the same notes which my uncle who did it in 1942-44 used. And he was very meticulous, wrote very well. The same topics were there, the polarization of light, the electromagnetic spectrum, emergence of Maxwell equation, etc., etc. And I taught the same thing in Canada in the 1970s. Things did not change much. What you are seeing now, and you are first-hand witness to it, and we see this most vividly in Moore's law. We saw electronics and computing getting better and better, cheaper and cheaper. The kind of thing that we are doing today would have been impossible without billions of dollars worth of equipment. And I was part of Indira Gandhi University. We had an EduSat and the satellite, and we went to a studio from that studio. And then also it was what was called one-way video, two-way audio, and so on and so forth. And now we've already come to this. So this was the doubling thing that happened. Now, this has happened elsewhere as well, and that is what has got us by surprise. People who know this rapid growth, and you don't have to be in science to know rapid growth. Ask anybody who gives money on interest or borrows money on interest, he knows how compound interest grows very fast. So whether technology or not, compound interest was enough to show people what exponential growth was. In fact, even in the arts, Ernest Hemingway had a play, I think it was called The Sun Also Rises. And it's a very interesting part. It's this play about just after the war and some very rich British people, how they led lives where they just spent away the money. And there's a very interesting dialogue there. One person is asking another. They're both former billionaires or millionaires or whatever he said. And one of them asked, how did you go bankrupt? And he says, first slowly, then very rapidly. Now, this is very important. Whether you are succeeding or prospering or you are diminishing, it happens slowly at first and then very rapidly. And this thing applies to cancer growth, it applies to chip growth, it applies to the coronavirus growth, it applies to so many things. It also applies to decline. We have seen. So when we see historically decline of Roman Empire, decline of so many things, look at the British Empire itself. Look at Britain, an empire on which the sun never set. Now it's struggling to be part of Brexit.
Yeah.
So, so this is the so what is interesting is it's a purely mathematical consequence. What gives rise to the situation where this model fits in varies. It's a growth of in the first few weeks and months. That is also exponential growth.
Yeah.
So that is how it is. Now, the interesting and challenging part is, so how do we respond in periods of rapid change? So we'll come to this as we go along. So you go with
Right.
your.
Sure. So yeah, exactly. That was the follow-up question. So I mean, I think you beautifully explained the idea of why this rapid growth, and I think we've been kind of building towards this period where now if you think of some of these companies that are $1 trillion companies and
Yeah,
with valuations, they didn't even exist 15 years ago. So
agree.
Facebook came into existence in 2004 and Google, I think 99 or something, and YouTube around that time. So just in these 20 years, we've just seen this massive explosion and also kind of um, uh, centralization of um, the technology prowess and power in a few areas. So yes, the next question, Dr. Pant, is yes, that's how it happens. But now that it is happening in front of us, how do we, as educators and as parents, prepare our children, react to it, and prepare our children for this world?
Very interesting. As educators, parents, learners, teachers, it's relatively simple. The bigger problem is the people who will look after society. So I'll come to this thing, but first I must sort of, not repress my urge to say something when you talked about 5, 6 companies which are dominating. So this is often called G Mafia. G Google, M Microsoft, A Amazon, F Facebook, I Intel, and the other A Apple. So
Yeah.
this is the mafia which is controlling the world. And why this is very important is that prior to this, there was this concept of sovereignty where the state controlled everything. If you remember, the concept of sovereignty is I have a currency, I have an airline, I have this, and everything is under permission from me. You were very young, but I'm sure your parents and uncles remember that we had to take a license for a radio and a license for a television. So we were permitted to receive programs because the government allowed us. Now the governments have no idea what these companies are doing. These companies have not been permitted by the government to do something.
Right.
Also, until recently, there was a government agency in each of these fields. So there was an Atomic Energy Commission which was looking after there was a Space Commission which was looking after something. There was a government agency which was in the same thing. Today there is no government in many of these things. They're completely, even the government has to use Facebook, Twitter, and so on. Right. They don't have anything NIC Twitter and Hamara Twitter and this, that, nothing like that. But that's a very interesting and different issue, and lots of people are trying to address that. How will humans live in that society? And I'm quite happy to come to that. But for educators, teachers, learners, it is very simple.
Right.
It is very simple because they don't have to look at the data. They have to look at the forces behind. So once you know calculus, you say it is, I don't need to need the value. If I know what is dy by dx, how is it going? Is d2y by dx square increasing? Is that going to become 0? So I observe the further parameters in that, the derivatives and the second order derivatives and so on. In fact, even in finance, they started dealing with derivatives and so on and so forth, which are not real products. Similarly, you also know there's another thing that we use often called moments of something, that you create that into x square, etc., etc. So from learning perspective, you don't look at that data, you look at the forces which drive that data. In fact, if you go back right to Newton's law, one of the big things which Newton talked about was that when you give a force, it is not the speed which is proportional to the force, it is the acceleration which is proportional to the force. So in a society of acceleration, we don't have to worry about the actual value so much as what is causing the acceleration and looking at those. And that is why, in popular phrase, the ability of learning to learn has been considered more important than what you learn. So learning to learn is like the force.
Right.
Since I drifted to Newton's law, I will draw an analogy to Newton's laws and learning. This is an analogy, so take it like that.
Yeah.
If you look at the first law of Newton, what did it say? Every body continues in a state of rest or in motion unless acted upon by a force.
Yeah.
Every person continues in a state of knowledge or ignorance unless acted upon by an external force.
Right.
Right? So if after doing your BA Tech from IIT, you don't learn anything more, you continue in that state.
Yeah.
And the force can be a positive force or a negative force. The negative force reduces your interest in learning, which is what most schools do. Most school teachers do. A positive force, second law says, a positive force increases your acceleration. Your ability to learn increases with a good learning intervention. So with a good learning intervention, don't go after what was taught. The transformation of the learner into becoming a more eager learner, capable of learning more, learning faster, learning better, is what happens. So that's a learning intervention, if you like to. And finally, to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. What happens is with teaching, learning experience, both the teacher and the learner learn. The learner learns the subject, the teacher learns about the learner.
Right.
And that's why an experienced teacher is a better teacher than an inexperienced teacher. So in many good universities abroad, some of the brightest people give the introductory lectures. In fact, Richard Feynman used to take the undergraduate thing for Caltech, because the idea is the more mature a person is able to deal with learners. In Russia, Landau, who won the Nobel Prize, was forced to teach high school children. Here, a Nobel laureate will never come to teach high school children. So the point that I'm trying to make is that for learning, we just have to now become correct. Instead of looking at the content, the facts, and I have often said that in most examinations, we look for, can the student write what is in the book without looking at the book? Now, you said, no, that doesn't matter. Solve the problem, get all the books that you want, talk to your friends, do everything you want. Internet is available to you. Now, at least go ahead and see how you handle the problem.
Right.
And therefore, the attributes will become your curiosity coefficient, your learnability coefficient, your speed of learning. How fast a learner are you? How quickly can you learn something new? And while I'm talking about this in general terms, there is a cognitive scientist or educator, whatever you can, called Guy Claxton.
Yeah.
Guy Claxton has actually coined a term for this called learning power. And he has a number of books and programs called Building Learning Power. And when you say, what do you mean by learning power? Originally it came in from Piaget, etc. But he says, learning power is when you know what to do when you have not been taught what to do.
Right.
So that is so for educators, the answer is very simple. Prepare them for an unknown world.
Yeah.
So just like you have muscular and physical fitness, and then you can do all kinds of physical tasks. If you have good learning power, cognitive power, you'll be able to do a lot of cognitive tasks, even if you were not taught that specific thing. And actually, this is the purpose of future education. This is the goal of future education, not to solve those questions again, but to solve something which was not there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so absolutely the way you are describing it, that what is critical for us is to build that learning power and to improve curiosity, improve the speed of learning, improve the ability to learn. However, when you look in our education system, essentially it is a complete opposite of that. So even today...
But that is because it is not an education system at all. It is a system of suppressing people.
Right.
So see, education can be a liberating force, or it can be a stifling force. Right. So I want to subjugate people. So if I want to subjugate people, that is the education. And therefore, I always say this, that the state wants to subjugate you, you have to liberate yourself. And therefore, education has to be in the hands of the people, their parents, community, whatever.
Right. So what would your recommendation to the parents be, sir, in that case? That
it is very simple. Very simple. First, accept the idea that learning is important. And instead of trying to say what is the minimum learning I can get away with, say what is the maximum learning that I can do. See, people want to know what is the pass mark, Yeah, what does it take? See, so instead of saying what does it take to get into IIT, you should say what does it take to learn science, learn STEM, be able to do things. And so what has happened is, and this is true of many things, that when you start looking at the final result, and you know this more than that, when you look at the final result, people will want to fake the result. They will want to do this by other means. They'll want to find shortcuts. But when you said it's the process of learning which is important, and if you've got that result without having learned, it will show up one day. And the worst part is that it will show up in your own inadequacy of that at the time of task. So it is all very simple. Encourage people. And I have said this is in terms of, forget philosophy, in terms of practical things, I have said something which is very, I told parents that every day a child comes back from school, talk to him or her about what she learned at school. Simple. Now, it will make your child a better learner because she will realize घर जाके माँ बाप पूछेंगे क्या पढ़ा है.
Right.
So instead of one exam at the end of the year, she has an exam every day.
Yeah.
And
also,
then,
sir, I remember you telling me that instead of even asking what you learned today, ask which question did you ask today.
That is the famous story of Rabi, who won the Nobel Prize. So when Rabi won the Nobel Prize, journalists asked him, so what made you a scientist? What made you a scientist? So he says, my mother made me a scientist. I said, but is your mother a scientist? He said, no. He said, while the other mothers asked, what did you learn at school today? My mother asked, did you ask a good question today? And this will become very famous quotation, etc. But I'm saying that, see, also, when you do that, express wonder at what the child is showing. Because for child, it was all very new. Even if you knew, you should ask and get the excitement and wonder. And I will share with you a story as to where this thought came to me. There is in Bombay a very well-known institute called National Center for Software Technology. It was an offshoot of TIFR. S. Ramani was its first director, and Mudhur was one of the directors at one point of time. And he was telling this story, and let me share the story with you. So Mudhur is the director of NCST. This is a high-end software institute. They were doing work on AI, etc. at that point of time in 1970s. And he says that, we had young faculty have young children have to go to school, and going to school and getting admission in a good school, that too in Bombay, is very challenging. So they came up to him and said that when we went to this thing, many of the principals said, can you organize a visit of our children to your institution and so on. So Mudhur said, fine, if this is so, then obviously go ahead. Though we were not clear what will a child see in an institute like National Center for Software Technology. But he said, fine. And then he tells the story that on that appointed day, he says, I am in my office, and suddenly these people come and say, sir, you have to go and talk to the children. He said, for 20 years, I haven't spoken to anybody who doesn't have a PhD in computer science. How do I go and speak to these children?
Right.
So he said with great distinct, because they said, but this is your role, you have to come. I went to the hall and I saw these 50, 100 young children with sparkling eyes, full of curiosity, and they're looking forward to something. I have no idea what I can do with them. So he says that suddenly something struck me. Internet was just around. And so I started, so children, have you heard of internet? So they said, yes. They said, so what is internet? Somebody said it's a network of computers. Then somebody corrected, it's a network of computers, and so on and so forth. I said, then I took them to everything, website, etc., URL, this, that. So I had my 15, 20 minutes. I was very happy. I was able to speak to children. And just as they were going, this is what teachers organize. They have these children in line. And one child would go and then come back, and go and come back. So he said, so I went to, so do you want to say something to me? So the child said, yes. So I said, what is it that you want to know? He said, uncle, now do you know about internet? Now, that gave me that trigger. That gave me the trigger. If we can get the children, every day they come from school, to have the feeling that they learn something which is very important and maybe their parents also don't know, it will lead to excitement for both.
Right.
And if these parents start doing this, then maybe they will actually find there's something new that they learn, And it is exciting because after all, it would be a long time since they would have forgotten. It would have been presented in a new light. But most of all, the idea that we learn and we learn together, and there is no age which is no longer an age for learning, is very important. I tell them, I say, otherwise, what role model are you giving to them? That education is for the young people. It is because you are forced to go to school. The elderly don't need to learn. The
Right.
elderly will only watch television, watch movies, or have political discussions, etc. This is not the right model. The right model should be that learning is something which we all do, and we all do, and we all learn from each other.
Right.
Fortunately, in today's time, in the technology space, children are teaching technology to the grown-ups anyway. So I
Right.
think that barrier has already broken. It might have taken to everything else. You may relearn your history, relearn your geography, relearn your physics or maths or whatever. But that could be a very good way of showing. And then what happens once it is there, and now with resources like internet so much available, you can make children explorers as well.
So, sir, actually, you touched upon some of these, some elements of the answer to this question, but there is a member of the audience, Bhavna Arora, who's asking, how do you learn how to learn?
Very good. So, okay, one answer can be you take a course from me. But the other thing is, there are very well-known courses. So, Barbara Oakley is a very well-known. She also written a book. She has a course on, I think, Coursera, where millions of people have done that course. So, it is very good that she's asked that question, because that is exactly what I want to say. That if you look at the field of medical science progresses. We don't treat diabetes the way my father was treated in 50 years ago or anything else. You treat them very differently. And now, of course, you have oximeter and you even measure how much oxygen is coming and so on.
Right.
But in education, we don't. Education still so this learning to learn has been a well-kept secret which no teacher wants to teach. Maybe they think that they will become unemployable after that because people would have learned to learn. But there's a well-known body of knowledge. Barbara Oakley's Coursera course is a free course which is there, but lots of things can be done, and one of the things can be parents can create a community which learns as a community and then follows it.
Right.
And there are what Barbara Oakley's work, and there are many other things which are. There's a book called Make It Stick, etc. And if people want, I can give them a set of resources on that. So what they're looking at now is that now that a lot of teaching was done based on authority. The teacher was the authority, he controlled knowledge, and he would be kind enough to give you that knowledge if you followed what he was saying. And this is in fact the problem, that much of our model of education is based on the religious model. There's a preacher, we often say sage on the stage and so on. So the preacher decides what knowledge can be given to you if you are in a behavioral good. Whereas today the idea is you should be able to seek knowledge. And neuroscience has given us a lot of information about that. So in medical science, the outcome of medical research is applied to medical practice. In education, that is buried in the book. Barbara Oakley's course is there. Her book is also there. And there are at least 10 books on learning how to learn. One of them is also very well called Make It Stick. This is it's a very nice book. In fact, I was given the reference of this book by a nephew of mine who worked in one of these big companies on the training part. So I asked him, so what is the thing in training now? What is the buzzword, fashionable thing? And he said, we realize in corporate training, we spend a lot of money in training the people, but it is all forgotten after a while. Right. So Make It Stick is about how to remain and understand that. And they found that the methods are very different. And therefore, the focus method and diffuse method and so on, interweaving of stories. So why do I put so many stories together? Because that is how it becomes easy and remains with you.
Right.
And so on. So there are methods of doing it. And then, of course, there's also reflection. There is what's called meta-learning, that how you learn best. Some people learn in a very quiet place. no disturbance, even the slightest sound will disturb them. Some people like to go to Starbucks and work there because that is what they like. A little bit of noise and a little bit of happening. Too much silence is not there. So there are techniques for this, and these are well available publicly, and you can also explore and find it yourself. But it's first thing is to accept that I need to learn to learn. So that is exactly the thing. And very often, in fact, even today, there is no university which offers a program on this. No school, no college. There is no induction program that telling you how to learn to learn.
Right. So 2 points I want to make. One is, this Made to Stick book, I probably read it about 10 years ago. And in order to make that point about stories being sticky and the fact that stories stay with you longer, this book actually starts with a story about this guy who loses his kidneys. So there is this gang that is operating, which goes and takes out the kidneys. So it's a very graphic scene that he starts with. And the point he was trying to make is that, look, this story will just, whether it's a false story, but it just stays with you.
Absolutely. No, I say this very often myself. So, for example, when I talk about Coursera or teaching company, etc., I have also done many of their courses, including this teaching company has very good paid courses.
Yeah.
So I tell this to a lot of people that one of my interest areas is DNA and biology and this thing. And so I said, if somebody had asked me about DNA, I would start talking about that it is one of the nucleic acids, by molecule. The big thing is it was a double helix. Crick and Watson looked at the diffuse scattering pattern of this thing to say it is double helix, not a simple molecule, etc., etc. And this allows replications. When I bought this course from teaching company, the course is on DNA. But the course begins with, there was a robber. And he was very good. He had perfected his art. And his art said that to do a bank robbery, you should be the last person entering the bank. And then you do this, this, this. So he went and did this and this. And then he was caught in a while. So he was caught in a while. So he had to go and do a sentence, whatever. But being a committed professional, while he was undergoing the prison sentence, he tried to say, why did he get caught? And he figured out that he had left his fingerprint somewhere. There was some trace of hair, something. So when he was out, having perfected his expertise, first he shifted to another location far away where records may not be there. Then he wore a wig, he wore specs, he did something else, wore gloves and all that, and went and did the bank robbery. And after having done the robbery, he was home, and within half an hour, the police came. And he didn't do anything. He simply said, so how did you know? And they answered, DNA. Now, you see, you look at the difference.
Right.
I am very knowledgeable. I'm telling you all about adenine, serine, porcine, guanine, etc. But will that register with them? Or will the idea that DNA can be used to solve crime register with them? So this is exactly the point. So when we want to make people learn, and the stories have to be different kinds for the audience that is there. But I tell this very often in my longer talks that I can also give lectures on DNA. I can talk about DNA, but the way this started, how can you ever forget?
Right.
Even if you look at simple physics, we all remember Archimedes jumping out of the bathtub.
Yes.
Whether we can apply the principle correctly to solve something, we are not sure. But the story is there.
Right. And that is one of the challenges in our education system is we cut out all of this context. So, now that you read about genetics or neuroscience or even physics, and you get a little bit of history of the scientist, of the person who invented or discovered a phenomenon, that sticks with you. Right. So, Walter Levine is one of the physicists I really like to. He has a whole, all his lectures from MIT, they are on YouTube. And essentially each class was a theater experience, literally.
So before that, there used to be Gerald Walker.
Yeah,
Gerald Walker was that. So he then the Halliday, Resnick and Walker became. I had
that's
seen
right.
Gerald Walker perform at one of these conferences and this thing. So this is the whole issue that see the first thing is, and I don't want to generalize it, but most school teachers are not excited about the subjects they're teaching.
Right,
It's a duty that they're doing.
right.
I often try to say it is like जैसे पुजारी पूजा पाठ कराता है आज
Huh.
संतोषी माता की पूजा करा दो आज शिव जी की करा दो आज इसकी करा दो वो करा देता है they don't have that excitement or passion of the subject.
Right.
So when you see Walter Levin doing that and putting the pulley and putting himself at risk, etc., it's a different thing. And he said, I have faith in physics, therefore I am standing here and the ball can come and hit me, but I know it won't come up to here. Right?
Right.
So and all these things, all the people who do that. So one of the important things is that they have to have. So most teachers carry their fear or distaste of the subject to their students. That's why so many people dislike maths.
Right.
Otherwise, why should they dislike? In fact, Barbara Oakley herself said I was very poor in maths, although she became professor of electrical engineering later on. And in a school, she was not so good in maths. Yeah.
So moving on to technology, again, I have seen you kind of be able to spot the trends in the future. So, I remember 10 years ago, you said MOOCs is the big thing. And until that time, Coursera and edX were still not mainstream. And then few years later, I saw they became mainstream. Then you said you have to learn about blockchain. And then few years later, blockchain was the thing. Then the third was AI. And I found that in the last 4-5 years, AI was the buzzword. What do you think is the next game-changing technology that is going to shape our world, our work in the decade to come?
Anyway, in the context of education, the answer is artificial intelligence. And people are not accepting its importance. They're seeing this as an add-on. Even in the new education policy, they have written this AI and they're not that AI will transform education and for the better. So all the limitations that we see in education today are going to be resolved with AI. Unfortunately, what has happened is even the industry, the AI industry, is not giving much attention to education because there are lots of lucrative opportunities elsewhere. So Anthony Seldon, I have taken his name several times, and I would urge you to read that book absolutely, chapter and verse.
Yeah.
So Anthony Seldon says that education is the Cinderella of the AI story. He says that. But he also says that's an opportunity for educators to latch on to AI before others catch on and disturb the whole model, etc.
Right.
So the reason, and this is now not about the future, this is already happening. This is happening. Lots of things have been done. I don't know whether you've heard the story of a professor called Ashok Goel, who was in Georgia Tech. No, very good. So this is a very important, you can Google it to know more. So Ashok Goel is a professor of computer science in Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech had some masters in computer science. With, like as you said, in the spirit of MOOCs, they threw it open to the world, so to say. Unlike MOOCs, which is free and is for your own thing, this was a fee-based course, an online fee-based course. Now, one of the things in an online course is how well you respond to the questions and comments which your students are having. So typically in a Blackboard or Blackboard LMS or any other, there's a chat. Now, the efficacy of your system depends upon how swiftly and adequately you are responding to those things which are posted on that chat. Therefore, professors have a number of teaching assistants whose job is to respond to those. So if you have 1,000 students in your course, every day there will be 10,000 posts because these are eager students. They're doing master in computer science from Georgia Tech. So they will have a lot of questions. And These teaching assistants are answering those questions and, like a call center, escalating to the professor if necessary. Otherwise, most teaching assistants will handle that. So what Ashok Goyal did, and you must read about this experiment in length. One of those teaching assistants, he made an AI.
Yeah.
And he used IBM Watson technology, and therefore he gave her the name Jill Watson. And there's a the whole detail is how he trained. So first he would do this and let her answers come to him, then moderated and finally left free. And eventually, the students didn't know that one of them was an AI.
Yeah.
Now look from this, why I said, so every teacher should have a teaching assistant so that the teacher can concentrate on the teaching part and not on the housekeeping and answering questions and this, that, including grading.
Right.
And so on. And it is not only multiple choice grading, even essay type grading today can be done by this thing. And especially you can train it. So you get shells of stuff and you train it the way you would do. What I'm therefore saying is that now look at an education system where every teacher has a teaching assistant, which is an AI-driven assistant. And therefore they can concentrate on their research and the teaching part, rather than the routine part, which is taking away a lot of time. The other complementary thing that I came up with was that every learner can have a learning assistant.
Right.
So wherever I am stuck, this can help me right away.
Yeah.
So I don't even have to go to the teaching assistant. So now so this is where it becomes very interesting. And I go back to this thing about learning how to learn. So one of the things that happens is that there is a barrier to learning something. So what are your barriers? You could say, for example, one of the things, because we teach in English, communication can be a barrier.
Right.
Now, if you have a private assistant who tells you every time that this he means this he means this he means this, what you would do by going into Wikipedia or Google or whatever, you have something that does it for you all the time.
Right.
Same thing. You look at this simple speech-to-text software. Now, if I have a speech-to-text software available with every student attending every class, I have all the detailed notes. Otherwise, what is happening is, I remember something, I can't take notes as fast, etc. I try to take the summaries or whatever. Every transcript of every lecture is available to every student. And then I can use text processing to analyze it and put it that way. I can say what word is coming, what is difficult, etc. So I am very clear that this is a roadmap which will make every learner a better learner and every teacher a more effective teacher.
Right.
And the difficulty is that it hasn't been yet seen by people. And one of the things is now there are so many opportunities in so many places that education is seen as the last one. So, as you know, there is now so much opportunity in climate change, in green economy, in this thing, and so on and so forth, that so-called the educationists themselves are very resistant to some of these things.
Right.
Because the picture that they have been given is a wrong picture of AI versus the teacher.
Right.
It is not AI versus the teacher, it is AI helping the teacher become a better teacher.
Right.
But somehow, because the teachers have kind of downgraded themselves to think this is all I do, it looks to them the AI will also, just like technology did not replace doctors yet. Technology made doctors more effective.
Right.
Those institutions which have hired, who have MRI and PET and so on, it is not that PET has replaced the doctor or MRI has replaced the doctor. So this somehow fear that has come that they want to resist. But the day this starts happening, and I'm sure it will happen, especially fortunately, COVID is driving many of these things in some sense. And because one of the things is that, as you know, that it's all about training these models with data. The technology, etc., is available. Now, here you need real teachers to do that and keep on training. So the people who will be labeling the data, who will be organizing the data, will have to be educators. That has not been automated yet. Although there is, you should read this, and any of your audience who's interested should follow something called GPT-3.
That's right. Yeah.
So this is something which is also a very general, what is called transformer model, which will allow a lot of tasks to be
Automated.
automated and therefore
Yeah.
simplified.
So there is a question on YouTube. It says, which programming language is the most important and we should learn?
Yeah, see, actually, programming language is not important.
Yeah.
The problem solving skills are important. And Janet Wing had used the phrase computational thinking for this.
Right.
So the point is, how would you get a computer to solve a problem is more important. Programming languages are, I had sent you once a video, I think, of how fast they change. So when I started programming in 1967, Fortran was the language, then COBOL was another language, then we came with Pascal, then we came with Java, C, C++, all kinds of the APL, Lisp, Prolog, this, that. So languages are, the usage depends upon the number. All of them are similar constructs. So therefore, basically, what is important is how would you solve a problem on a computer. So in fact, there's a very famous book by Poglia, How to Solve It. And so knowing how to do that, so more about, if you might call, algorithms or whatever is important. And you can learn whichever language is the flavor of the day. So whatever, today answer is Python. Today, the most, if you were to say, okay, finally cut short all the philosophy, what should I learn today? So learn Python. But it won't last for too long. So you will need to learn. Already there is things like Julia and Haskell and so on and so forth, which are coming up. And with GPT-3, maybe you don't need to learn a programming language. So therefore, we don't know that the next level would happen. But answer is, if today you want to learn something, it is Python.
Right. Even now, sir, what I hear from programmers and developers is that it's rarely that they write code from scratch. It is most of the time
you build on
create a structure.
See,
you
need to See, you need to know language so that you can use ready-made built structures into.
So GitHub or Stack Overflow, those are kind of places where you are able to find ready-made modules to solve most of the.
But even to use that, you must know what's inside the module, right?
Exactly.
So this is like, see, the problem is anyway, you need to understand at depth, but you don't have to do everything from initials.
Absolutely. We are in the last 10 minutes, sir. One of the questions is around, how do we incorporate tech education in us? So, we are hearing about robotics. We are hearing about robotics changing the world, robotics taking over surgery, medicine, automotive jobs, even caregiving, IoT changing the world, with sensors. More than 1 trillion sensors will be connecting different devices, our watches, our clothes that we wear, shoes that we wear. So how should we prepare our children to learn some of these and even get exposure to some of these fields? Because in schools, clearly, this is not being addressed.
Yeah. So, see, one thing is very simple. You have to take charge of the learning of your people, whoever you are interested in.
Right.
If you find schools which to some extent are aligned with that, don't duplicate what is happening in the school. But you cannot depend upon the school, because the schools are totally out of sync. And I have no hesitation in saying that the owner of the school is not interested, the principal is not interested, the teacher is not interested, and they just want to get by. And this is the exact issue. So if you want to do something, and learning community, to me, is the new construct that we need.
Right.
Learning community. You talked about GitHub, etc. They're essentially learning communities. So the new model we need to do is that the sage on the stage, guide by the side, etc. Authorized teacher is one thing. We create communities to learn whatever you want, and the community can have people at different levels of learning. And there will be professional experts also. They come in, they this thing, and they can see a role model. You imagine that you see the role model of what profession you're going to choose while you are still working, not as a separate thing. And the reason I'm saying this learning community is important is based on very found principles. Again, another story. There was a lady called Elinor Ostrom. She was a professor of economics in Bloomington University, Indiana. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize in economics in the year 2009. Unfortunately, she's passed away. She's no longer alive. But she got the Nobel Prize for a very interesting piece of work. Prior to her work, it was often believed and accepted. Garrett Hardin had a paper called The Tragedy of the Commons,
Right.
which said that if things are held in common, then nobody takes care and this gets into misuse and overuse, etc., etc. That was almost like a central dogma. But Elinor Ostrom did lots of such common resources like grasslands, water, this, that, whatever, across the world, and you don't get a Nobel Prize without establishing this well, that some things are better managed by the community than by either the government or the private sector.
Right.
So although she got a Nobel Prize, nobody wants to talk about her work.
Yeah.
So in fact, she was here in India, in Delhi. I gone to attend the talk, but there were fewer than 100 people. No important person was there. Jairam Ramesh was Minister of Environment. They thought he must have something to do with it. But the principle was very important. The principle is if a community decides to handle it, it can do a better job than either the government or the private sector.
Right.
So now government doesn't want you to know that you can learn better than my authorized NAC curriculum, or the Pearson doesn't want you to know that you can learn better without them. And this is learning is a commons.
Right.
Knowledge is a commons. So it is best. So what happened after her success? Even Garrett Hardin changed his theory because she created principles of managing.
Right.
So she said it is held in common, but there have to be principles of managing that commons. So Garrett Hardin changed this thing to tragedy of the commons to tragedy of the unmanaged commons. So she has, and if you look at the scientific community, that is a community. It is not by virtue of authority. And if you look at all cultural things, you look at Ramlila, Durga Puja, all these are organized by communities. They create, and self-organizing systems exist. Swarm intelligence is about self-organizing system. So I am a great proponent that educators should create self-organizing systems, not in competition. You do your own thing, like beehives do their own thing. They make their honey. Sarkar can keep on doing what they want. So we are not quarreling, you versus us. We're simply saying, you do your best, we do our best. Let people choose a mix of whatever works for them.
Yeah. Great. We've reached the last segment, like 4 minutes left. So I'm just seeing if there are any questions, please do put it on the chat. But this has been a fascinating conversation, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here. I am again taking a lot of resources back to study further. But a few things that I captured while you were talking. One was, I think we as individuals need to take charge of our learning. We need to understand how to learn and what to learn. And while we stay in the system and while we go to schools and our children go to schools, but we need to do that for ourselves and become our own masters of learning. Second was that what is important in this age today is the curiosity coefficient, the speed of learning coefficient, and the ability of learning. And one of the kind of metrics or parameters that has been used for that is the learning power. And lastly, the communities of learning, which are kind of self-forming, self-regulating, is important. So even in these areas of robotics, IoT, there are communities that are doing work in this space, and you need to find your own tribe and be part of it so that your learning can be supported at different stages. But sir, is there anything else you would like to add as
No, I
closing?
think you've captured it very well. When I talked about learning power, you can also probably use the word cognitive capital or knowledge capital, whatever.
Right.
But what I would want to suggest to you is that we are going to have many new topics which are going to come up. And one of them is quantum computing. So
Right.
you know how it has changed. In a few years ago, they had 5 qubits with 3 qubits, 15 number. Then Google with 53 qubit achieved quantum supremacy in October 2019. IBM has publicly given a roadmap that by 2023 they will have 1,000 qubit computer which will have much more quantum advantage. Somebody recently said quantum chemistry major problems have been solved. Schrödinger's grandson is trying to make something which is going to be millions of qubits. Somebody said that in 5 years' time there will be a desktop quantum computing computer. Now, what I'm trying to say is the question will then arise, so how do we prepare for this? Now, we will not create one more institute for advanced studies in computing. Let it be a community-driven effort. So, in fact, I would suggest that if you can do you're placed in Bangalore, create a group, not for everybody, a set of children from class 9 to 12 who are aware of quantum by the time they leave school.
Right.
They don't have to, they will at least have see, if you're being told Newton's laws, you should also be told that Newton's laws are only approximate.
Yeah.
Right? And what better time than that itself? And also, I think, see, when we were young, it was very difficult to imagine such things like quantum, making something big, etc. Even atomic theory was difficult. But today's children all know pixel and megapixel.
Yeah.
So pixel is quanta. So you tell them, just like you're seeing pixels and you're saying pixels can get distributed, so particles can get distributed, they can reassemble, and you can tell them about quantum tunneling, quantum entanglement, everything by the time they leave school.
Right.
And in a sense, this will be very, very good because the moment you do a bit, everybody, see, IBM will support you.
Right.
IBM will immediately support any site because they already have given access to quantum computers in the cloud on which children can play quantum games, quantum battleship, quantum this thing. So you are in a very good position to somehow support a community-led thing for quantum at school.
Yeah.
And
I think
all companies have put their stuff on the cloud. So
right.
It's not like we have to have our own computer, etc., and so on. And they have created communities which are open. But when you create, see, if you have only children not knowing, it won't work. So you in Bangalore, you'll get a few people who know, etc., etc., put them together and create a community and just see it how it shapes up.
Right.
And in a couple of years, you will have the first set of people who pass school and have made some kind of a quantum thing. Just like children made apps a few days ago or made websites a few days ago, they would be able to do that. Yeah, fortunately, in our budget, Nirmala Sitharaman had put away some 8,000 crores for quantum, etc. But after the COVID, that is all forgotten. But I think young children between classes 9 to 12 can be a very good because then people see the value of the community. Because if something is already happening in a certain way, people are reluctant to try new things.
Right.
Pythagoras theorem वो टीचर पढ़ाएगा तब समझ में आएगी, but जिसमें कोई टीचर है ही नहीं, and there is a possibility in this thing. So put your things together to create a community of people, quantum explorers.
Absolutely, thank you, sir. So there is one last question from a student here. It says, if we think about IIT, then which branch should we take for a bright future?
See, again, in IIT, the core thing is the IIT experience.
Right.
It is not the branch that matters because most IITians do not work in the branches which they graduate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they should not worry about branch. It is at that point of time, with most other institutions, IITs were very different. And as I have said very often, I have summarized it in a couple of sentences. IITs transform the slide rule wielding engineer to a computer programmer.
Right.
So from just trying to find what is the answer to the problem, they would program the program. And in fact, this one gives me one more concluding point to share with you. So this is the main question that I have. So what does it mean to know something? And the earliest meaning of evidence of knowing something was that I can repeat it.
Right.
So I can define and I can give you the formula. As often say, I still tell you that pi is 3.14159265, log pi is 0.4972, square root 2 is 1.414, square root 3 is 1.732, and so on. So this was the next level was what Feynman says, can you teach this to somebody?
Right.
So that was a better form of learning. That I learn it, then I can teach it. The third is, can you program it?
Right.
So can you tell a computer to do it?
Yeah.
And the fourth is, can you create a machine learning system which can learn to do it?
Right.
Then you have really learned something. If you can only do it yourself, it's a limited form of learning.
Right. Thank you very much, sir. This was, as always, an enlightening conversation. We will try and see how we can pull together the community to learn these new age technologies, especially quantum computing, as we go forward here.
Yeah, and quantum, don't limit it to computing. Quantum biology is exploding even faster.
Right.
So all these people are now looking at new drugs, new this thing, completely different. Quantum biology is actually leaping ahead. Quantum computing is a tool which is helping quantum biology.
Right. Right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We do have a community of educators which is called Avishkar for Education on Facebook. It's a group where we share such resources. We will be sharing recorded parts of this conversation in that group as well, and all of the resources that Pant sir mentioned will be mentioned in that group. So please do join the group. And there is a community of Avishkaris, innovators, people who make new things, which is called Let's Avishkar. So please join that, share some of the projects that you built. And we look forward to seeing you again next month with another topic relating to K through 12 education. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.